Folks, the Bible tells us a lot about what's going to happen in the last days, and so much of what the Bible tells us is going to happen in the last days is actually manifesting. I'm going to talk about something very significant to this in just a second, and yes, it does involve the Pope yet again. But let's talk a little bit about the coming Antichrist and what he is actually going to do. First of all, we know from what the Bible tells us that the final Antichrist that's coming wants nothing to do with God. He's not a religious person. He has no desire to acknowledge any affiliation with God. As a matter of fact, we know that at some point he is going to set himself up in the Jewish temple and demand to be worshiped as God, and is going to require a whole bunch of people to take the mark of the beast on their forehead or on their hand. And if they don't do it, they won't be able to buy or sell. And quite frankly, they will be killed. Now, we know this from Revelation chapter 13, and there's a lot of other Bible passages that tell us that as we get closer to the last day, we are going to see darker and darker times. The prominence of secular humanism is here. It's alive and well. We are looking at the culture of death through abortion and all the other kind of nonsense that's going on. We know that genocide is a common term that's being thrown around. There are lots of false leaders that claim to be Bible-believing people. Case in point, Raphael Warnock just finished telling everybody that it would be God's will for a woman to be able to have the right to choose to murder her baby through abortion. Kind of funny to me, by the way. He's a black guy, calls himself a minister, actually a civil rights guy, and 3% of the child-bearing population in this country is black, and yet they account for 50% of the abortions. But that's a completely separate issue because we're not talking about false religion and false teachers like him. We're talking about the Pope. Now, this is an interesting one, and I do think it is unique and somewhat remarkable to the overall perspective of what's going to happen with the final Antichrist. And the Pope does this. It's interesting. Now, there is an article in Breitbart that says Pope Francis asks non-believers to send him good vibes in lieu of prayer. So what happens is he's addressing a French group, and he is talking about the condition of the world and how hard things are. And he actually goes to talk about how important it is to save the world from, weakness and fragility and so on and so forth, weapons and all the other fun stuff. It's a sort of part of his secular humanist agenda. And then he basically says this. He says, I ask you not to forget to pray for me. And if someone does not pray because he does not know how or cannot, at least send me good vibes. That's literally what he says. And then he goes on to say, I need them for his work. Now, I want to take a moment to look at the ministry of the false prophet and what he is going to do for the final Antichrist who wants nothing to do with religion. The ministry of the false prophet will be able to bridge the gap between some people that have a semblance of religiosity to tie it in with a leader who hates God and wants nothing to do with it. It is interesting how he will use the heading of religion and God to sort of tie the knot between those who consider themselves to be believers and the secular humanist world. Folks, this is crazy. This shouldn't be a surprise to you, but it's just more evidence of one very simple fact, and that is Jesus is coming soon. Time to keep our eyes open, folks. The world around us is getting darker. We're seeing evidence of it. Until the Lord comes back for his church, we need to stand up and be shining lights to show the world what God has asked us to do, and that is to stand for righteousness. God bless you guys.